So the whole, paradigm was starting to change for me. I'm going, wow, this isn't right. And as I looked at, I defaulted to Scripture and looked at Genesis and started there, and realized that worship wasn't mentioned until I think the 23rd or 25th chapter of Genesis. And God said to me, worship's not the most important thing. And I was always telling people, you were created to worship. Because I thought we were created to worship. But as I looked at that scripture, I'm thinking, wait, God came into the garden not because he was looking for worship. He wanted to have a relationship with people. He wasn't asking for us to worship him. He was saying, I want to spend time with you. I want to be with you. And so that kind of, all bets were off for me. So I knew that worship was more than music, for sure. And that we had one of our defaults, that's a huge one in the church, is that music is the sole expression of worship. We're going to have our Sunday service starts at 10. Worship is from 10 till 10:30. Seriously? And then at 10:30 we'll have the message. Oh, so I've got 30 minutes to worship. And so all of this, as you see, it started to become really disturbing to me. So I started to think, well, maybe worship isn't just about music. And maybe worship is feeding the poor. Maybe worship to God is finding a place for the homeless. Maybe worship is social justice issues. Maybe worship is loving my wife. Maybe worship is showing Jesus to my children. Maybe the Father looks at that and says, that really blesses me. That really is my heart. And so all of a sudden, worship was not becoming music anymore. Well, that kind of messed me up. There goes my career. So we started doing some radical things within the context of worship, but let me bring it back to this whole idea of raw worship. When Dawn and I started talking about raw worship, one of the things that came to mind was that raw could be an acronym. And I use this acronym carefully, but RAW to me stands for ready, available, and willing.
That's good.
And I think in the posture of ready, available, and willing, if you're in that posture, anything you do will be worship. And so I started looking as a worship leader on how to change this idea that music was our only form of worship. So as I told you last night, we had that silent Sunday, that uncomfortable hour and a half where nothing happened. But it's not true that nothing happened. What I didn't take time to explain last night was, yes, that first 20 minutes was excruciating. And that's when I saw all these people going to their defaults. The Bible's opening, the people praying in tongues, the obligatory glories being said. But then I saw people walking over to another person in the congregation and embracing and asking forgiveness. Then I saw people taking communion unprovoked, because we had a communion table just set up, but we didn't call for communion. It's just that if you felt like that was an act of worship, do it. And that was a very telling time, and you know the story about the guy, with the pornography problem, and all of that. It seemed to indicate that yes, we were in a weird situation with what worship was going to become. Some parts of the story that you don't know was one worship event I did. I had the people stand up who were at the event and said, okay, let's worship. And then I invited them out of the building, and we went into the city, and I said, go help some people who need help. And that was our worship time. And people were horrified. They don't, that's not what they paid for. They paid for, an hour of good music. Really, that's what worship is, an hour of good music. Because they wanted to be taken someplace. Because you know why? All their expectations were placed on that 40 minutes or that 1 hour. That's their only worship time. Part of the problem with corporate worship is that if that's your only worship, there's a lot of expectations placed on that 40 minutes or hour. Right? You're putting a lot of expectations on the worship band, you're putting a lot of expectations on everything. And unless you have a personal worship lifestyle, I think you're missing a good portion of what worship is. See, for me, Sunday is just a continuum of what's happened throughout the week as I've worshiped. And I've worshiped throughout the week not by singing songs, although that's not wrong. I've worshiped throughout the week by taking care of somebody, loving somebody, giving the waitress a $60 tip on a $5 item. I've worshiped in a whole bunch of different ways. So when Sunday comes around, I got no expectations. I'm just continuing. But I'm doing it with a bunch of my brothers and sisters who I happen to now like. I didn't like them before. So I think that's one practical way. If we're starting to get into answering the question last night about how do we practically implement some of this stuff, one of the practicals is develop a personal worship lifestyle that goes beyond music. You don't have to be artistic. You don't have to be gifted to be a worshiper. You have to love God. And I think that's the only qualification. So yeah, worship has become something completely different for me. And in this posture of ready, available, and willing, I've been able to see things that I wasn't able to see when I thought worship was an intimate song that went on for 15 minutes. Because those are the good ones, right? Those 15-minute slow, intimate songs, those are the ones I really like. Like, it kind of ticked me off when God started telling me to do secular stuff in church. Because I really wanted to do You Are My Passion and things that I really liked, that again, I got something from. But this was about God.